we've talked a fair bit about how your listener benefits as a result of making the podcast, but let's look at how you benefit and what you get out of this. Now, all creative work exists for a reason, right? And this is a piece of creative work. It could be so that you can experiment and maybe get some creative fulfillment. It could be to create space for a conversation that we need to have or that needs to be heard. It could be to spread a message that we need to hear, or to increase your profile. Now, money shouldn't be a goal, but it often is, because we get told that money and podcasting are intrinsically linked, and they're not. So most of the people who will tell you that are telling you that because they benefit from that particular outcome. So we'll talk a little bit about money, but it is not a goal for creating a podcast. So why are you making your podcast? Here's some things to think about. I like to think about this, the idea of, will it make the boat go faster, which came from an Olympic rower who was gearing his team up for a huge competition and decided that every choice that he and his teammates were going to make leading up to that race would be in service of the question, will it make the boat go faster? So if they were considering whether they went out for a drink in the pub or whether they had a hamburger, will it make the boat go faster? Probably not. But if they got up at 5 a.m. and trained really hard and, I don't know, ate kale, yeah, it will make the boat go faster. So every decision they made was in service of that question. So let's look at some of the reasons behind why we make stuff and why we're making a podcast. Experimentation, exploration, creative fulfillment, that kind of stuff. The first thing I want to say to you is you have my permission to not make money in your podcast. It is okay for you not to make a penny. It's great if it doesn't lose you money. It's great if the podcast can facilitate you in some direct or indirect, mostly likely indirect way of making money. But you have my permission for this not to be something that, despite what many people will tell you, it doesn't have to make money. You also have my permission to not have thousands of downloads. It's okay. And more than that, the number of the people listening is really not important. What is important is how closely connected they are to you and your cause, and perhaps to each other. That is, it's the connections and the bonds and the strength of those bonds that are far more important. The levels of engagement that you get between your listeners and between your listeners and yourselves, or you and your listeners, that is of far greater importance than the sheer number of people who were listening. It's okay for this to just be fun. You have my permission to just enjoy this, for this just to be fun. And it can just be for you. This can be about a story of yours that needs to be told. And hey, it's great if other people enjoy it, but I'm making this for me. That is totally an okay reason to have a podcast. And it can be a space that you can learn and play and experiment. And I think of that as learning out loud. And that's something you get to do from day one. No one is asking or expecting you to show up with perfection right from day one. You absolutely have the permission and the right to step up and figure this out as you go. That's absolutely cool. So another reason for creative work is to hold space for conversations. Those could be discussions that we need to be having, that there's a sense of urgency behind them, that no one else is talking about these topics, or they're not talking about them in the right way. And so we need to create space where we can have those conversations. It might be about talking to people who don't have a voice, raising up those voices, creating some kind of equity so that the people whose voices aren't being heard are being heard, and the people, and so that we as a listenership are hearing from voices that don't sound like ours, or don't sound like the mainstream voices, more importantly. Maybe it's about having awkward conversations. Maybe it's about challenging ideas in an interesting and fun way, or just those kind of taboo topics. Maybe it's something a bit more risky, a bit more controversial, where someone might get upset. But these are conversations that need to be had that aren't being showcased elsewhere. Another reason for creative work is to spread a message. It doesn't have to be a big lofty message. It doesn't have to be a new religion. It might be a great new productivity hack. It might be a new way of working within a charity. It could be something small. It could be something medium. It could be something epic. Maybe you've written a book or you're researching one. This is often a great reason and a popular reason for people creating podcasts, is they're researching a book and they want to gather as many conversations as they can as possible. And it's often so much easier to bring people on board and say, hey, I'd love you to be on my podcast, than it is to say, hey, I'd like you to give me some content for my book and I don't want to pay you. So that's one of the reasons podcasting can really work. One of the things that I do want you to think about if you are creating a podcast to spread a message, is to consider the marketing for the marketing. So if we think about the podcast as being marketing for the message, you also have to market the podcast. Having a podcast isn't just marketing on its own. It doesn't just get uploaded and get discovered. Podcasts don't get discovered. People get told about them. And so if you don't have an audience, it gets a little bit trickier. So if you don't necessarily have the time either, if you've got an important message and maybe you've got an audience, you do need to make sure to think about, once you've got an episode out, how are you getting it to that audience? And we'll look at all sorts of options that are available to you. But I just want you to think about that the episode doesn't just sort of suddenly, it's not a build it and they will come scenario. Very few things are. There is not an algorithm that's going to put this in front of people. So think about ways that you can bring that message, bring the ideas to people so that they know, hey, there's a podcast that goes deeper into this conversation. Another reason for creative work is to increase your profile, give you a bit more visibility. It's great to establish authority on a given topic. When you have a podcast about something, you are declaring an interest. There is a not insubstantial amount of work and effort and thinking that goes into creating a podcast, or even starting and planning one. So when you start to approach guests and who are maybe thought leaders in a particular space, and maybe you don't know that much yet, but you're curious and you're seeking to find out more, then the fact that you've decided to start a podcast on a particular topic already gives you a bit of a weight, because it shows that you have at least more than a passing interest in a particular topic. It's also a kind of audio CV. It's a great way for you to be able to say to someone, hey, I'm not new. Like, I know about this stuff because I've had like at least 20, 30, 40, 50 conversations with different people, and I've learned a load. And, you can synthesize that, or you can just point people to your body of work. And that's really impressive, to have a CV and then to be able to say, here's like 20 plus hours of content that I've created about this particular topic, which might be to land you a job, or as part of a pitch for a piece of work, or to engage in support. It can be a way of getting you in front of high-profile people, a little bit like I've already sort of gone into. It can help you not necessarily knock down doors, but it makes them easier to open when there's a podcast that's being jammed through the door, rather than you saying, hey, can I just pick your brains for half an hour or an hour? It's very different from, do you want to come on my podcast? Do you want to publicly have a conversation that has that tacit thing of, you're doing a little bit of marketing for yourself, that's something that they can use as part of their media package. It has an intrinsic benefit to them. People also enjoy talking about stuff that they're passionate about, and if they feel that this is just an interesting conversation where they get to explore the stuff that they care about, rather than you grilling them for information that they could find out for free, or they could find out if they, if they paid for an hour of their time, like a podcast is a really great way to be able to get in front of those people. Now, as I've sort of alluded to already, when we're talking about the marketing for the marketing, podcast is not a growth medium. It's not a way to build an audience from scratch. It is absolutely a way to deepen the conversation. There are ways that you can grow an audience with a podcast, but it's really hard to seed one. It's pretty much, it doesn't happen. And that's partially because audio doesn't spread virally, and podcasting is largely decentralized, which we'll talk about what that means later. But in its broad terms, it means there is no algorithm that's deciding what your next episode is going to be. So it's not let's upload this and then people will come to it. So if you're using this to grow your profile, then just be aware that it's a long game, and it's something that it's a body of work that you're building, that in a year, a couple of years, you get to look back on and to be able to share them with people and say, here's this substantial piece of work. So let's talk a little bit more about making money within your podcast. Money is 100% not a reason to make a podcast. I'm not saying you're not, obviously, you're allowed to make money in your podcast. Of course you are. You're allowed to do whatever you want, but I'm not advising you that you shouldn't make money on your podcast. I'm not taking some weird stance. What I'm saying is it's not the reason to make a podcast. Don't start a podcast because you think it will make money, because it will not. Not with, as my mother would say, not with that attitude. If money is the goal that you have, think of a better goal. That's all I'm saying here. The reason I'm sort of hammering this home is as I want to help you sort of understand and set those expectations. Maybe 10% of podcasts monetize in some form. Most of those smaller podcasts, the huge bit of the iceberg that goes underneath the water, that is mostly through small donations and things like Patreon or Buy Me a Coffee. It's people who like the content and want to support it. And if that's something that you want to do, if you want to, as one of my clients says, let the podcast wash its face so that it's not just completely losing you money, so that maybe you can make back some hosting fees and that kind of stuff, then that is a really, really good way of sustaining the podcast, using things like Buy Me a Coffee or Coffee.com or Patreon. Those are great ways that you can get a bit of support. You can also offer bonus content through things like Memberful and Supercast, and those are options as well. I just don't want you to start off with that being the goal. And then advertising is often one of the first things that people talk about. When can I get ads? How can I get ads? There is this idea that ads are this big sort of money maker, and I think there's a couple of reasons people like ads and want to talk about ads, is because it feels like it legitimizes the work. If you can grow to a size where you've got ads, you sort of feel, hey, look at me, I've got a monetizable product. And there are ways that you can get ads if that's important to you. There are hosting companies that have ad marketplaces. You can find other podcasts that have trails or trailers or promos that you can integrate into your podcast. You can record affiliate ads. You can just find places that have affiliate schemes, be it Aweber, the email people, for example, or Audible, that are just, here's a promo code. You can pick media hosting companies. There's all sorts of ways that you can create ads if that's important to you, if the idea of having an ad feels like that legitimizes your work. But I don't want you to feel like it does. And I don't think with the kind of work that you want to do that it ends up being more of a distraction than it is something that is actually going to make your boat go faster, because the numbers just aren't going to add up. As you can see here, you need significant numbers of downloads, anywhere between sort of 8 and 20,000 or more downloads. Now, that's not a hard and fast rule, because a lot of it is down to not simply the size of your audience, but the quality. And again, the strength of those connections and the strength of the connection between you and the listener. And that strength of purpose, that bond of purpose, can also be really valuable if you do want to strike up a relationship with a sponsor that feels like they're aligned to your work. But I think for the most part, for most of the work that we do, we are the sponsor, because we are funding the work and we're doing this to support the work that we do. So that's, in most senses, what we're doing. And with that, you can sort of integrate the quote unquote advertising of your organization into the content that you're making. Advertising is totally doable. Making money is totally doable within your podcast. I just don't want it to be the reason that you put out an episode, or the reason that you think podcasting is a good medium, because like my mother said, as I said, not with that attitude. All right, that's enough finger wagging. Let's get on to some more useful goal stuff. Now, if we talk about setting goals and keeping track of goals, one way that I'm sure you're already familiar with is the idea of SMART goals. Something that is specific, measurable, actionable, relevant or realistic, and time-bound. Only use this framework if it is helpful to you, because it's not helpful to everyone. It tends to base success on extrinsic outcomes rather than intrinsic things that we can input into our work. So it's sort of measuring the output and the outcomes, or rather it's measuring the outcomes rather than the output. And what we want to do is measure the output, the stuff that we create. And we can do that by creating a pact. So rather than a SMART goal, a pact is purposeful, actionable, continuous, and trackable. So here we're focusing on intrinsic outcomes as opposed to the things that we can't control. We can't directly control how many people listen to our podcast, but we can control how many episodes we make. So some other things to avoid building goals around: the number of listeners or downloads, the amount of money that you raise for your podcast or from your podcast, the number of followers you have on social media as a result of listening. These are things that you can't directly control. You can have some influence over them, but it's really hard to nail down that correlation or that causation for the correlation. So instead of thinking about extrinsic goals, think about things that we can track, some outputs that we can track, like the number of people you interview, the number of episodes you put out, the consistency of your output, whether if you said you were going to show up weekly, are you showing up weekly and on the same day? You can track the time that it takes to put each episode together, and hopefully you'll see that line go down over time. You can measure the breadth or the depth of the conversations that you're having. How deep are you really going into really crunchy, meaty topics? These are intrinsic things, and they are under your control. And so they're great things to measure because you have a direct influence over them. And then by putting in the work and by working smartly, not as in the acronym, but by working in that way, the extrinsic outcomes will come along. but we're not grasping and hoping for those. We're just showing up and doing the work. So, some homework for you. Write down your podcast's purpose in a sentence. So this is a little bit different from your listener story. Just think about why you want to have a podcast, why you've chosen to have a podcast. And then write down the outcomes that you want as a result of having a podcast. And again, try not to think about making money or growing your audience, but instead think about how you can show up to that audience. How can you enrich their lives, or how can you make space for conversations that need to be? How can you champion causes that aren't being championed? That kind of stuff. Pick the lowest hanging fruit that you can track, whether it's the number of episodes that you make or the conversations that you have, the number of marginalized voices that you uplift. And then build a spreadsheet to track that progress. So it could be how long it takes you to put out an episode. That, the first couple, it's going to take you ages. It's going to take you hours and hours and hours, maybe even days, because you're having to learn all of this stuff from scratch. You're having to stop and start and figure out, like, is that the right thing to do? And, have another go at it and that kind of stuff. Give it a few weeks and you'll see that number come down dramatically. So that's a great one that you can track. Another one is the number of guests that you've reached out to, the number of people that you've spoken to. When I'm planning my shows, when I'm working on shows, and I have 3 of them, I have tasks, regular tasks, to go and find new guests and to find new topics and to engage with people in communities, rather than reach X number of downloads by this week. Because I can't control that. I can only control the stuff that I do. So save your outcome list. So that big list that I said to create, that you've sort of picked some lowest hanging fruit from. Save that outcome list, because you can track that again in a few weeks' time. You can go back to it and say, okay, what do I want to focus on now? Maybe it's the same, or maybe I want to do a little bit of extra work on another area. Now that I've sort of nailed that low-hanging fruit, maybe I can tackle something that's perhaps a little more esoteric, or something that previously maybe felt a little bit beyond my reach. And now I know that after putting in some work, I know that this is something I can do. And maybe you even start to think about, well, I know I wanted to reach or reach out to 5 guests a month. What about if I reached out to 10? Now that I know that I can do that, and then you can really start to see the boat going faster. Right, with all of that in place, we are now going to think about putting your brand together.